I'm here with Pastor Olu Brown of Impact Church in Atlanta. Pastor Brown, how are you doing today?
Good, Christian. Great to be here with you.
Great. I'd like to start out today talking about you. Can you tell us about your pastoral journey? What was life like for you before getting involved in ministry, and when did you feel compelled to pursue the calling?
I had one of those interesting stories. People quote Jeremiah quite often that opens with, "Before you were born, I knew you." And so, considering it fortunate and unfortunate at times, I knew pretty early on what my journey and my trajectory would be. And so I was blessed to have mentors and guides and leaders who helped me to recognize the call of God on my life. And so early on, started helping out in my local church. And from that, went on to undergrad and served as a student pastor, and then went on to seminary. And while in seminary, worked at a local church in Atlanta, Georgia, and specifically was the youth pastor. And then that translated into an associate pastor position. And during that whole time, really sensed God was leading me to plant a church. And so in most churches, you would call it a senior pastor. We call the role a lead pastor. And so 13, going on 14 years ago, planted Impact Church with a group of about 25 people. And so that's been my ministry journey over these last couple of decades.
Have you faced any significant challenges, either personally or otherwise, since you were ordained?
Very much so. Like anybody, I have a story, and that connects personally and professionally. I'm not sure if you can disconnect the two. In ministry, I remember coming into the ordination process, and as a part of the United Methodist Church, we have a pretty extensive process that can last more than several years and go through testing and different levels of approval. And I remember I was coming to the end of my ordination period, and there was a level of approval that I had to get, and it was being threatened by a decision that someone could make that basically could discontinue or prolong my ordination period. And I remember I reached out to a mentor and was in tears and concern. And in that situation, like in every situation, God worked it out, because it was really a question about my integrity. And I knew I'd done the right thing. I, crossed my T's and dotted my I's. And thanks be to God, because of documentation, I was able to prove my integrity in the process, and things worked out. But that was an experience for me personally and professionally that was very difficult. Of course, personally, over the years of ministry, you face a lot of challenges. And some of those can be related to leadership. Those can be related to raising generosity, to make a vision come to pass. I recently finished a book that will be ready this Advent season. And I was recalling an experience in 2010. Our church was about 3 years old, but in that single year, we lost 3 individuals who were very close to us and to me as a leader. And one of those individuals, we weren't as close, but his family and his story was a real part of my life. And so those kind of things make tremendous impacts on you when you still have to lead. And as some people would say, you're bleeding while leading. But over the years, I've learned not to act as if I don't have challenges, but to acknowledge those challenges and connect with the people and the resources that can help guide me through them.
Can you kind of describe how those challenges have impacted the way that you lead within your ministry?
Yeah, one of the ways, and we talk about mental health, and because of the way I grew up with individuals who valued mental health and valued all the things that you need to do to keep, the mind and body as healthy as possible. Although I always had a deep spirituality, I was never raised with an understanding that anything and everything should only be prayed about, but that there are skillful people who have wonderful academic backgrounds and practice backgrounds who, along with prayer and a community of faith, can help you through very difficult seasons in your life. So the ministry we lead now is very open about mental health and encouraging people at any age to invest in mental health therapy. I talk about my own journey of having a therapist that I engage with. As COVID-19 became a reality, I reached out to my therapist and said, hey, we're going to have to check in a little bit more frequently in this season. And I've been doing that. And so we talk about holistic salvation. It's not a term that we made up. We got from another clergy person. So when we think about holistic salvation and how we do ministry, it really comes out of me personally and other leaders. And we realize that we're not this kind of binary object, but that we're spirit, we're mind, we're body, we're career, we're family, we're economics, we're environment. So that is some of the way that it shaped my ministry of being able to say we are whole beings with a lot of different parts, and we can't separate those in ministry or only talk about one and not talk about the other. So that comes through a lot of the ministry that I've helped lead over the years.
So how do you balance fulfilling your responsibilities as a pastor with the responsibilities that come with being a husband and a father?
Mm. And that's a great question. Up until 2018, I was married for 14, 15 years. And when we talk about personal challenges, experienced a divorce. And that's a real reality that I've seen in ministry, but I've also seen it in many other professions. So that was a personal challenge that I faced. And so for me, no longer being a husband meant, all right, what does it look like to be in this profession, but also remain a father? And so, like any parent, you manage to navigate schedules, you manage to navigate interests of kids, but always making sure that you keep focus on the main thing for the kids and the main thing for yourself. Sometimes I think in parenting, we can lose sight of self, but keeping priority around what feeds your vision, feeds your passion, but also knowing you got to make the time, you got to make the arrangements, and be involved in the life of your children. And I believe that's true if you're married or if you're single or whatever the parenting relationship may be.
So given those challenges that you talked about, how do you balance and manage that with also prioritizing your own self-care?
Yeah, one is scheduling and being realistic about schedule. And I often find when my schedule is overloaded, things begin to fall through. Maybe a meeting is canceled, there's a weather pattern that comes through the country, and you're not able to fulfill, that meeting or that occasion. COVID-19, all of these things happen. And so I use those opportunities to step back and say, okay, I've probably been going a little bit too fast and furious down this lane. Let me scale back and work smarter and not harder. So scheduling is one option. Two, being realistic about my own capacity. And I think as we all get older, we're able to realize we're not superhuman beings. And so if I have capacity for 4, what does that look like? And then managing along that line. If I have capacity for 20, then not trying to supersede with 30. And trusting that, managing schedule, managing capacity, and then also trusting through delegation. And that's easier for some. There have been times in my leadership where I have been more on the side of micromanaging, but having to shift away from that quite a bit and trust that God really has people who have the heart of ministry, have the heart of vision, and they may not do it the way you would do it, but as long as it gets done and God is honored. So scheduling, capacity, delegation, and then what we talked about earlier, paying attention to mental health and being focused and having healthy relationships with people who are honest with you and challenge you to be honest with yourself.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your church. What are some of the most significant issues within your congregation that you've had to address? So we've talked about mental health, an issue that's being promoted more within communities. Has this been the primary issue of concern, or has there been another area that you've had to put a lot of energy into?
Yeah. Well, it has been a primary area for us, not an area of concern, but an area that we want to make sure we're talking about. So, mental health is one of those areas. Community economic development is another area. Our church is in an area that has experienced some historic decline, but yet there is a strong community, strong leaders, and strong industry. And so, how as a church, yes, we're focused on worship, but it's bigger than worship. How do we help to be partners in the economic development? United Way in our area published a child well-being survey. And so in our church's zip code, it is a red zone for youth and children. And that translates to third grade reading scores, math scores, poverty, health insurance, the education of the mother. And so a kid in our community doesn't have as many opportunities or amenities as a kid in another community. And that's important to us. So those have been some of the biggest concerns, is partnering with the community and making sure that our children are safe and secure and have every opportunity for succeeding to the fullest of their potential. And historically, we focused on those types of challenges and those types of issues.
So, a key focus of your church is doing church differently.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important to you, and what does that look like?
Yeah, earlier on, we were thinking that's really about technology and having the latest, greatest in technology. But the longer we experience that, we realize it's much bigger than technology. It's more about a philosophy and way of thinking. I was on a call with a group of leaders yesterday, and they called out our tagline, doing church differently. And of course, in the midst of COVID-19, other people are using that tagline. And it seemed to be something that was prophetic. We didn't know it then, but it is prophetic now. That 14 years ago, we set out with this dream to say, hey, we're going to do church differently. And so at this point, we realize it evolves. In 2020, doing church differently means being 100% virtual. It means being a community advocate for testing for COVID-19 status. It means being on the front lines and behind the front lines of protesting for justice for all of God's children. It means holding law enforcement accountable. In 2 years, it may mean something else. So doing church differently means ultimately being open to God's Spirit on how we are to be used in this present season, and knowing that every season may be different, but how can we be faithful in this season to the call of God on our lives?
So on that thought of doing church differently, how does your church connect with the younger generation of believers? How does your ministry make the church relevant to young people who may be exploring their faith?
Great question. A couple of things we do, going back to that whole technology investment, we've always been forward as it relates to technology. So a lot of faith communities, the entry point is through the front door. I remember reading an author who helped us to understand some years ago that our new front door was our website. Now the new front door is virtual via your cell phone. And so when we think about making church relevant and accessible to all age groups, one of the first ways is by bringing down historic barriers of entry that would cause some people to have to dress a certain way, to act a certain way, or to go to a physical place. So making it accessible to people via their cell phones. The other way is thinking about a lot of the traditions of the church. And we talked about dress, we talked about culture, we talk about language. And so thinking through all of those kind of things and asking ourselves, are we speaking the actual language of the community of younger people that we're trying to reach? And it doesn't mean we're not authentic. It's not important for me to be my kid, but it is important for me to understand more about the world that they live in. And the same is true for a local church. And so are we building intentional relationships with younger people, not to tell them what to do, but to understand who they are and what they do and why they do what they do? And to find ourselves in opportunities to celebrate them more than opportunities to correct or discourage. So those are just some of the things that we do. And of course, when we think about culture and the way we think about young people, that translates into a lot of different things, from programs to events to even what's coming up in a month or two for us. We've been partnering with one of our impactors who does a 5K race. And of course, this year it's going to be a virtual race, but that's an image of what it means to think differently. And of course, it's going to be more younger people than older people. And there are churches who would never even consider partnering with a 5K, but we're going to do it. And not only are we going to do it, and have we been doing it, but we're also going to put a mission component to it, because there's a part of our community that needs to be cleaned up. So not only do we commit to partnering to run and have healthier bodies, but we're also going to commit to cleaning up the community. And that is one of the biggest ways we found to connect with young people. A lot of times people think that younger people aren't concerned, don't want to do anything, but they do. They just don't want to always do it through the traditional methods. And so building a habitat house, doing a community clean, doing a good favor for a neighbor or a friend. So those are some of the ways that we connect with younger generations.
What is your church's position on the recent events, including the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the current focus that exists around police brutality, systemic racism, and injustice?
Yeah, we believe that any systemic racism or injustice acted upon any group or any person is wrong. And so we stand with God and we stand with humanity to say that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, in the words of our beloved Dr. King. And we also stand with first responders, believing that all first responders are not bad individuals. A lot of those individuals are our parents, our grandparents, help protect and serve us, even when we don't need or know, rather, we don't know we need to be protected and to have their service. So we look at a fine line and are able to hold organizations and people accountable for their wrong actions, but don't believe that those organizations or people in some cases are inherently evil, but they're evil actors and evil actions. So we're able to hold in balance. We're also able to hold in balance the sad atrocities that are happening within African American communities against African Americans and done by African Americans. So we tend to have a pretty agile way of thinking around justice, to where we're not solely focused on one area of injustice, but we're focused on all areas of injustice and what we would call mutual accountability, to hold a police officer who takes the life of a Black person accountable, who no one deserves to receive injustice, but in those cases where it is very blatant and very open, we hold them accountable. And we also hold accountable the African American who takes the life of another African American. And we also hold ourselves accountable when we as leaders in the church don't show justice and mercy, as Micah reminds us, to all God's children, whether that is people who are part of the LGBTQIA community, where on one hand, we can't fight that police officers stop killing Black boys and Black girls in the streets, and then simultaneously deny full rights and liberty to our own brothers and sisters who are part of the LGBTQIA community. So there's even internal injustice, in particular in a lot of our churches, that we're blinded to, that we can no longer be blinded to, but that we have to hold each other and most importantly ourselves accountable to offer justice to all people.
In closing, what would you say to people who are struggling with their faith in the midst of this pandemic and the current political and social climate?
First, I would say you're not alone. And there are a lot of people, whether they say it publicly or not, who feel the way you feel. And so you're not alone in current society with people who are struggling with their faith, but you're also not alone in the historic society. Some of our greatest leaders struggle with their faith publicly and privately. Some of the greatest movements struggle with their faith publicly and privately. We know the recent passing of C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis, if they were able to stand and tell you now, had they ever struggled with their faith, had they ever struggled within the movement, I'm sure their answer would be yes. And so that's encouragement for us today to know, as one of my professors used to say, wherever there's great faith, there are always small traces of doubt. And I think the doubt that we have and the struggles that we have ultimately make our faith in whatever we believe in stronger. And so I would encourage people to use this as an opportunity to have a renewed trust and faith. Of course, as a Christian, I believe in a higher being and believe that that is something that helps me through, but I realize that is not the case for everyone. And whether you believe in a higher being or a higher source, I hope that you would have belief in something that is bigger and greater than you, to know that life is cyclical, that, as the songwriter says, this too shall pass. But most importantly, faith and trust in the good of humanity, to know that we are called and created as people of faith and people who are inherently good, and that good does really triumph over evil, even when it doesn't seem like it. So my greatest word of encouragement would be to hold on and to see the goodness of the humanity that's all around us, and to know that there is more good than evil in the world.
Pastor Brown, we thank you so much for your time and all that you share with us here today.
Well, thank you, Christian. I wish the best to you on your journey, and knowing that you are already doing your part, and in the days and the weeks and the years to come, I just pray that God will continue to unfold the vision.
Next time on Beyond the Pulpit.
I don't think police should exist according to the Bible, because according to the Bible, there is no police in the Bible. I even agree with the prison system. The prison industrial complex is a system set up to make money. It's not to keep criminals off the street. It's to make money. The prison system is the new Jim Crow.